It's been 2 years since that night in the Tillamook State Forest. On the surface, my life looks normal. I go to work, laugh with friends, and pretend everything is fine. But deep down, I know I'm not the same. My name is Aaron Vance. I'm 33 years old, and I've seen something I can't explain. Something that changed me forever. It started as a weekend escape. My life in Portland had been unraveling. A dead-end job, a messy breakup, and the suffocating noise of the city. I needed solitude, so I packed my tent, some supplies, and a tattered map of the Tillamook State Forest. The forest was vast, ancient, and alive in ways I didn't understand. I arrived late Friday afternoon, the golden light filtering through the towering evergreens. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the exhaust fumes and concrete back home. I found a remote clearing to pitch my tent, far from the designated campsites. Perfect. Alone. Just as I wanted. The first night was peaceful. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the crackling of my campfire soothed my frayed nerves. I drifted to sleep, feeling a rare sense of calm. But that serenity didn't last. On the second night, I heard it for the first time. A low, guttural rumble echoing through the trees. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it stopped me mid-bite as I ate my canned chili by the fire. At first, I told myself it was just the wind or some animal, but it didn't sound right. It didn't belong. I ignored it and crawled into my tent, convincing myself I was imagining things. But sleep didn't come easily. Hours passed, and the sound returned, closer this time. It wasn't the rumble of an animal. It was rhythmic, like breathing. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then came the snapping of twigs just outside my tent. Something was out there. I grabbed my flashlight and hunting knife, my hands trembling as I unzipped the tent. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing, just trees and shadows. But the air felt heavy, oppressive. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The next morning, I decided to hike deeper into the woods, hoping distance would clear my mind. The deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew taller and thicker, their trunks gnarled and scarred. The light struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting everything in an eerie twilight. I stumbled upon a circle of ancient stones covered in moss and strange, angular carvings. My gut told me to turn back, but curiosity overruled caution. I crouched to examine one of the symbols. It was deeply etched, worn smooth by time, and radiated an inexplicable sense of wrongness. My fingers brushed the surface, and a sharp chill ran through me. That's when I noticed the smell. A sickly, sweet, metallic stench that made my stomach churn. Suddenly I heard it again. The rumble, louder now, vibrating the very ground beneath me. I turned, scanning the forest but saw nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating. No birds, no wind, just an unnatural stillness. Then I saw them. Eyes, glowing yellow eyes staring at me from the shadows between the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. The flashlight beam trembled as I tried to focus on them, but every time I thought I had them, they seemed to vanish, slipping deeper into the forest. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root. As I scrambled to my feet, a shape began to emerge from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, its silhouette distorted like a nightmare come to life. Fur clung to its elongated limbs, matted and slick with something dark. Its head was wrong, too big, too misshapen, and its teeth, God, the teeth, jagged and gleaming as it opened its maw to let out a guttural roar that shook the trees. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. The sound of its pursuit was deafening, heavy footfalls, guttural snarls, and the crashing of underbrush. I didn't dare look back, I just ran, adrenaline and sheer terror driving me forward. I burst into my campsite, grabbing my car keys from the tent. The creature was nowhere in sight, but I knew it was close. The forest felt alive with its presence, watching, waiting. My car was parked a mile away down a narrow, unpaved trail. I grabbed my flashlight and started running again. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning closer, their branches clawing at the sky. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, flickering just out of sight. The rumble returned, vibrating the ground beneath me. I heard it behind me now, crashing through the trees, gaining. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life just as the creature burst from the tree line. For a brief moment, I saw it fully in my headlights. Its grotesque, twisted form, its eyes burning with malevolence. It let out a shriek that made my ears ring and lunged. I floored the gas pedal. The drive back to civilization was a blur, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. When I finally reached a gas station on the outskirts of Portland, I sat in my car shaking, trying to process what had happened. But there was no rational explanation. Nothing could explain what I had seen. It's been 2 years since that night, and I haven't been back to Tillamook. But the forest hasn't left me. I hear the rumble in my dreams, feel the weight of its gaze when I'm alone. My once orderly apartment is now cluttered with books on cryptids, folklore, and the paranormal. I've scoured forums for similar stories, finding only fragments, vague accounts of glowing eyes and unnatural shapes in the Pacific Northwest. I've thought about going public with my story, but who would believe me? I'd be dismissed as a lunatic or a liar. So I keep it to myself, this terrible, wonderful secret. But I can't stay away forever. The forest calls to me, its whispers growing louder each day. I find myself planning another trip, packing supplies, checking and rechecking my gear. I know it's dangerous. I know I might not come back. But I have to know the truth. Because some risks are worth taking, no matter the cost. And some answers are worth facing the darkness. My name is Ethan Drake, and I used to think of myself as a rational man. At 28, I was a software engineer living in Chicago, spending most of my days staring at screens, immersed in code. My idea of adventure was trying a new flavor of ramen from the convenience store down the street. Nature. That was something I experienced through desktop wallpapers. But after a crushing breakup and months of burnout, I needed an escape. A real one. That's how I found myself in the dense, remote woods of Black River National Forest in Michigan. It was the summer of 2023, and I had decided to rent an RV and disconnect completely. No screens, no emails, just me and the wilderness. It sounded perfect on paper. It turned out to be anything but. The drive to Black River started off serene. The forest was lush, the air crisp, and the sound of tires crunching over gravel was a soothing change from honking horns and city noise. The rental RV felt massive, but it was surprisingly easy to handle. By late afternoon, I found a secluded clearing near a lake, far from the main road. It was picturesque, so quiet I could hear the breeze rustling the leaves. The first night was uneventful. I built a small fire, struggled to cook a canned meal, and admired the stars. The forest felt alive in a way that was comforting. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked, and the occasional owl hooted from the treetops. As I drifted to sleep in the RV, I thought, this is exactly what I needed. But something changed the next day. I woke to an unnatural stillness. The morning mist clung to the trees, and the lake's surface was like glass, but the forest was silent. No birds, no insects, just an oppressive hush. Shrugging it off, I decided to explore deeper into the woods. Armed with my new hiking boots, a cheap flashlight, and a multi-tool I'd never used, I set out, following what seemed to be an old, overgrown trail. The further I went, the darker the forest became. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches intertwining to block out the sun. I kept hearing faint sounds, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, but every time I stopped to listen, there was nothing, just silence. An hour into my hike, I stumbled upon something strange, a clearing dominated by a massive stone structure. It wasn't natural. The stones were stacked in a circular formation, covered in moss and etched with strange symbols. They pulsed faintly, as if alive. The air around the structure felt heavy, charged. I took a step closer, and a deep, guttural growl rippled through the clearing. It wasn't a sound that belonged in the world, a mix of grinding metal and a predator's snarl. My stomach churned, and a primal fear took hold. I ran. When I finally burst back into my campsite, my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe I was tired. But the forest didn't feel the same. The shadows stretched too long, and the silence was deafening. That night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every crackle of the flames, every pop of a twig, made me jump. I retreated into the RV, locking the door and drawing the curtains. I lay in bed, clutching the multi-tool, listening to the oppressive quiet. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic thumping. Faint at first, but growing louder. It wasn't footsteps. It was heavier, deliberate, like something massive was moving through the forest. The RV shook slightly, as if something brushed against it. My heart raced. I held my breath, straining to hear, but the sound stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. The next morning, I found deep gouges in the dirt around the RV. They looked like claw marks, far too large to belong to any known animal. I should have left right then, but some stubborn part of me refused. I told myself it was just a bear, maybe a cougar. I'd seen enough wildlife documentaries to know they avoided humans. Right? Determined to prove I wasn't imagining things, I decided to hike back to the clearing. This time, I brought my camera, hoping to document the stone structure. The forest seemed darker than before, the air heavier. As I approached the clearing, a foul stench hit me, rotting meat mixed with sulfur. My stomach churned. The structure was still there, but it had changed. The symbols on the stones glowed faintly in the overcast light. Around it were signs of a struggle: broken branches, deep gouges in the earth, and dark stains that could only be blood. Then I heard it. A low rumble like before, but closer. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Emerging from the shadows was a creature I can only describe as wrong. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, hunched, its skin a grotesque mix of fur, scales, and exposed muscle. Its face was a warped fusion of wolf and man, with glowing yellow eyes that locked onto mine. I ran. The creature pursued me, crashing through the trees, its guttural snarls echoing around me. My legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I burst back into the clearing near my RV, dove inside, and slammed the door shut. The RV rocked as the creature rammed into it. Its claws screeched against the metal, and its snarls turned into a bone-chilling howl. In a moment of sheer desperation, I grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and aimed it at the door. When the next impact shook the RV, I fired. The flare burst through the thin wall and struck the creature. Its howl turned into a shriek as flames engulfed it. But it didn't retreat. The last thing I saw before it vanished into the forest was its smoldering eyes, burning with hatred and something far worse: intelligence. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn finally broke, I drove the RV out of the forest without looking back. Every shadow on the road felt like it was watching me, waiting. When I reached the nearest town, I parked at a gas station and sat there for hours, shaking. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that I'd imagined it, but the claw marks on the RV said otherwise. And the camera I'd used? The photos of the stone structure were blank, the memory card corrupted. It's been 6 months since Black River. I've moved back to Chicago, but I can't forget. I still hear the thumping in my dreams, still feel the weight of those yellow eyes on me when I'm alone. The stone structure, the creature, the forest, they're out there, waiting, and I know one day they'll find me again. My name is Henry Cole. At 36, I was a seasoned emergency room nurse working in Denver, Colorado. I had seen death in its many grotesque forms: gunshot wounds, car crashes, overdoses. Nothing surprised me anymore. I prided myself on being unshakable, grounded in reality. But the events of October 2021 shattered that belief and left me haunted. I decided to take a much-needed break after years of relentless shifts and sleepless nights. I craved isolation, far from the endless beeping of monitors and the acrid smell of antiseptic. That's how I ended up renting an RV and heading to the Clearwater National Forest in northern Idaho, a place untouched by modern chaos. It was supposed to be a retreat, a reset. Instead, it became a nightmare. The first day was tranquil. The forest was alive with birdsong, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle burble of a nearby creek. I parked the RV in a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering pines. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. That night I sat by a small fire, the stars above so bright they seemed unreal. The forest whispered around me, a symphony of nocturnal life. I fell asleep feeling safe, cocooned by nature. But the next morning something felt off. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, just a heavy, oppressive silence. It pressed against my ears, making me uneasy. Shrugging it off as city paranoia, I decided to explore deeper into the woods. The trail I followed was faint, barely visible beneath the underbrush. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The towering trees blocked out the sunlight, creating an eerie twilight. As I walked, I noticed strange things: claw marks gouged into tree trunks, patches of ground where the foliage was unnaturally withered. A foul stench hung in the air like decaying meat. Then I saw it. A massive paw print in the dirt, larger than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't a bear or a wolf. It was wrong. The claws were too long, the shape distorted. My stomach tightened. I should have turned back, but some morbid curiosity pushed me forward. An hour later, I found a clearing dominated by an ancient, crumbling stone altar. It was covered in strange symbols carved deep into the rock. They seemed to shift and shimmer when I looked at them, like they were alive. Surrounding the altar were animal bones, hundreds of them scattered in disarray. Some were fresh, the flesh still clinging to them. I felt bile rise in my throat. A sound broke the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around me. It was a deep, resonant vibration that made my chest tighten. My flashlight beam darted through the trees, but there was nothing there. The growl came again, closer. I ran. By the time I reached my campsite, the sun had set. Darkness swallowed the forest, and the oppressive silence returned. My hands trembled as I tried to start a fire, but the matches kept slipping from my grip. Finally, flames licked at the wood, casting flickering light over the clearing. But the fire didn't feel safe. The shadows it created seemed alive, twisting and reaching. I locked myself in the RV, every nerve on edge. Then came the first thud. It was faint, like something heavy had landed nearby. Another thud followed, louder, closer. The RV shook. My heart pounded as I grabbed a kitchen knife, the only weapon I had. The sound of claws scraping against metal sent chills down my spine. It was deliberate, slow, like something toying with me. Then came the growl, so close it vibrated through the walls. I dared to peek through the curtain, and what I saw will haunt me forever. A hulking figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its silhouette illuminated by the dying fire. It was humanoid but grotesquely twisted. Its fur was matted and dark, its elongated limbs ending in claws that glinted in the firelight. But it was its eyes that froze me. They glowed yellow, filled with malice and something far worse: intelligence. The creature moved closer, its head cocking unnaturally as if studying me. The RV trembled under its weight as it pressed against the side. My breath caught. Then with a final snarl, it leaped back into the darkness. The next morning, I found the campsite torn apart. Deep gouges marred the ground, and the fire pit had been scattered. My chest tightened as I saw claw marks on the RV's metal shell. I wanted to leave, but my curiosity, fueled by some irrational need for answers, kept me there. I decided to hike back to the altar. It was a mistake. The forest seemed darker than before, the air thicker. Every step felt like I was being watched. When I reached the clearing, I froze. The altar had changed. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Around it were fresh sacrifices. Small animals, their lifeless eyes staring blankly. My stomach churned. A sound behind me made me whirl around. The creature was there, standing just beyond the tree line. In the daylight, it was even more horrifying. Its fur was patchy, revealing sinewy muscles beneath. Its teeth, jagged and stained, glinted as it grinned. A chilling, almost human expression. It charged. I ran, my lungs burning as I dodged branches and leaped over roots. The creature's guttural growls and the thunder of its footsteps were terrifyingly close. I tripped, falling hard onto the dirt. As I scrambled to my feet, the creature loomed over me. Its stench was overwhelming. It swiped at me, and I barely managed to roll out of the way. My knife was useless against something so massive. Desperate, I grabbed a jagged rock and swung it, connecting with its face. It howled, a sound that echoed through the forest like a death knell. Using the momentary distraction, I bolted. I didn't stop running until I reached the RV. I started the engine, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the keys. As the RV roared to life, I saw the creature at the edge of the clearing. It didn't chase me. It just stood there watching, its glowing eyes boring into mine. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. When I finally pulled into a gas station, I collapsed in the driver's seat, my body trembling. The cashier gave me strange looks as I stumbled inside, covered in dirt and blood. I didn't care. I just wanted to be away from that forest. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. What's out there. The altar, the symbols, the creature, they're all connected. Something ancient, something malevolent, lurks in the Clearwater National Forest. And it's not done. Even now, back in Denver, I can't escape it. I see those glowing eyes in my dreams, hear the growls in the silence of the night. The forest isn't just alive, it's watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself in Clearwater, don't go alone. And if you see the altar, run. Some places are meant to be forgotten. My name is Thomas Riker. I'm 42 years old and a police officer in Messino, a small coastal town in California. Known for its breathtaking cliffs, whispering redwoods, and sprawling vineyards, Messino has always been a place where people come to escape. But beneath the idyllic charm lies something dark, something I learned firsthand on a fateful autumn night in 2022. That September morning began like any other. My wife, Evelyn, was busy preparing breakfast for our twin daughters, Mia and Lily, while I skimmed the local paper over a cup of coffee. Life in Messino was predictable, peaceful. At least it had been. The call came in just after 9 a.m. Two hikers, a young couple named Jacob and Emily Crane, had gone missing near the old Kelsey mine. Felix, my partner, a 30-year-old with a penchant for ghost stories, was already pacing by the time I reached the station. "Kelsey mine?" he asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "You know the stories, right? The lights, the screams." I waved him off. Probably just another couple who underestimated the forest. Let's not jump to conclusions. We packed our gear, strapped on our radios, and drove out to the trailhead. The drive was uneventful, but as we ventured deeper into the forest, a strange fog began to roll in, twisting through the trees like grasping fingers. The trail was eerily quiet. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of our boots on the dirt. About a mile in, we found the couple's campsite. The tent was torn, the ground disturbed. Felix crouched to examine something near a tree. A backpack, half buried in leaves. Inside were Jacob's wallet, a map, and a flashlight, but no signs of them. "Thomas," Felix called, "you might want to see this." He pointed to deep gouges in the tree bark, claw marks that couldn't have come from any bear or mountain lion. My gut twisted. The gouges were too precise, too deliberate. A cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it the faintest sound of a woman's scream. It was distant, but unmistakable. Felix's eyes widened. That came from the direction of the mine. Reluctantly, I agreed to follow. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew denser, their gnarled branches forming grotesque shapes. Shadows danced where no light should have reached. I caught glimpses of movement just beyond the edge of my vision, too fast to identify, but undeniably there. An hour later, we reached the clearing. The Kelsey mine stood before us, a black maw carved into the earth, its entrance framed by rotting wooden beams. The air was heavy, oppressive, carrying a metallic tang that made my skin crawl. Scattered around the clearing were remnants of an old mining camp, rusted tools, shattered lanterns, and broken carts. But it was the symbol carved into the mine's entrance that froze me, a circle split by a jagged line. I'd seen it before in Messino's oldest records, tied to a forgotten cult that once plagued the area. "I don't like this," I muttered. Felix ignored me, shining his flashlight into the mine. "If they're in there, we have to go." I hesitated, every instinct screaming to leave, but duty pushed me forward. The mine was suffocatingly dark, the air thick with the stench of decay. Our flashlights illuminated ancient wooden supports that groaned under the weight of centuries. Deeper inside, The walls were marked with the same jagged circle symbols, painted in what looked unsettlingly like dried blood. Then came the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind, but the sounds grew distinct. Hushed voices speaking a language I didn't recognize. They echoed down the tunnels, growing louder as we pressed on. Felix's flashlight flickered, and I saw it. A fleeting shadow that didn't belong to either of us. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Felix nodded, gripping his radio. "Base, this is Officer Rodriguez. We're in the Kelsey mine. Possible visual on—" His voice cut off as the radio emitted a burst of static, followed by a guttural growl. A thud echoed ahead, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy, dragging footsteps. My heart raced as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Jacob, or what was left of him. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were vacant. Deep gashes crisscrossed his body, his chest marked with the same cursed symbol. He stumbled toward us, mouth opening as if to speak, but all that came out was a wet, choking sound. "Jacob!" Felix called out, stepping forward. Before I could stop him, Jacob lunged. His movements were jerky, unnatural, but impossibly fast. Felix fired his gun, the shots deafening in the confined space. Jacob fell, writhing, his body convulsing as black ichor seeped from his wounds. Then he stopped moving. "We need to leave. Now," I said, my voice shaking. But Felix was staring past me, his face pale. I turned and saw them, dozens of glowing yellow eyes watching us from the darkness. We ran, the creatures pursuing us with terrifying speed. Their guttural growls echoed through the tunnels, and the air grew colder with every step. My flashlight revealed glimpses of their forms, twisted humanoid shapes with elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws. We burst into the clearing, the creatures stopping just short of the mine's entrance as if bound to it. But their eyes burned with a malevolent hunger, promising they wouldn't stay confined forever. As we caught our breath, a sound behind us made me turn. Felix was staring at his arm, where a deep scratch oozed black blood. "It got me," he whispered. The next few days were a blur. Felix was taken to the hospital, but his condition worsened rapidly. His veins darkened, his eyes turned glassy, and he began muttering in the same guttural language we'd heard in the mine. By the third day, he was gone. Not dead, but missing. He'd vanished from his hospital room, leaving behind claw marks on the walls and the same jagged circle symbol carved into his bed frame. The mine was sealed off, but I knew it wasn't enough. Whatever was down there was ancient, powerful, and far from finished. Months later, the nightmares began. I dreamed of the mine, of Felix's vacant eyes and the creature's yellow gaze. But they weren't just dreams. At night, I'd hear scratching at my windows, guttural growls in the distance. Once I woke to find the symbol carved into the wooden floor beside my bed. I began researching the cult tied to the mine, discovering its horrifying purpose: to awaken the creatures, ancient guardians of the forest, and unleash them upon the world. The cult had been destroyed, but the ritual was never completed. The creatures remained bound to the mine. For now. I still patrol Messino, keeping watch for signs of the curse spreading, but the shadows feel closer, the forest darker. I know the creatures are waiting, growing stronger, and one day they'll break free. And when they do, no one in Messino will be safe. My name is Ethan Myers. I'm 38 years old and a nurse in the sleepy town of Pine Grove, Idaho. After years working in the chaotic world of emergency rooms, I moved here for peace, a life away from constant sirens and suffering. But in the summer of 2023, the forest showed me a horror I'll never escape. It began with exhaustion. I'd spent weeks covering shifts for sick coworkers, drowning in double shifts and endless nights. My body felt hollow, my mind clouded. When my supervisor suggested I take some time off, I agreed reluctantly, knowing my sanity depended on it. Camping wasn't my first choice, but the idea of being surrounded by nature, away from the buzzing fluorescent lights and sterile walls of the hospital, appealed to me. I rented an old RV, packed some essentials, and set my sights on Clearwater National Forest, a sprawling, untouched wilderness known for its serene beauty. I wanted isolation. I didn't realize it came with a cost. The drive was uneventful at first, but as I entered the forest, The road narrowed, the trees closing in like watchful sentinels. The canopy grew so dense that sunlight barely filtered through, casting the path in an eerie twilight even at midday. I parked in a secluded clearing by a narrow stream, its gentle babbling the only sound. As I stepped out of the RV, a strange sensation washed over me, a heaviness, as if the air itself carried a warning. The forest seemed alive, its stillness unnatural. Shaking off the unease, I set up camp and decided to explore the area. I followed the stream, its clear water cutting through the dense undergrowth. About half a mile in, I found something odd, a bone. It was large, weathered, and out of place. My rational mind told me it belonged to a deer or bear, but the shape was wrong. Its surface was etched with strange, spiral-like carvings. A rustling in the bushes snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned, my pulse quickening, but there was nothing, just the faint sound of something retreating deeper into the forest. That night, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames as shadows danced across the trees. The forest was silent, save for the occasional crack of a branch. I should have felt relaxed, but the heaviness from earlier lingered, growing stronger as the night deepened. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, distant but unmistakable. My rational mind dismissed it as a bear, but my gut knew better. Gripping my flashlight, I scanned the tree line. The beam caught movement, a flash of something tall and impossibly fast, slipping between the trees. I retreated into the RV, locking the door and pulling the curtains tight. For hours, I sat in the dark, knife in hand, listening. The growls faded, replaced by silence more unnerving than any sound. The next morning, I resolved to leave. Whatever peace I'd hoped to find wasn't worth this unease. But as I packed, I noticed something chilling. Deep claw marks gouged into the side of the RV. 5 parallel lines, each over a foot long. My heart pounded as I realized they hadn't been there the night before. Despite my fear, curiosity compelled me to stay one more day. I needed answers. I ventured deeper into the forest, following the stream again. About an hour in, I stumbled upon a clearing dominated by an ancient stone structure. It was circular, with a flat top etched with symbols identical to those on the bone I'd found. The air here felt wrong, thicker, heavier, as if the forest was holding its breath. I approached cautiously, running my fingers over the cold, weathered stone. A sudden chill prickled my skin as the wind whispered through the trees. It sounded almost like a voice, low and guttural, speaking words I couldn't understand. Then I saw them. Footprints. They were massive, far larger than any human or animal, and they surrounded the structure in chaotic patterns. Some were fresh, the mud still damp. A guttural roar shattered the stillness. It was close. Too close. Panic surged as I realized I wasn't alone. The shadows around the clearing seemed to shift, shapes forming and dissolving as if the forest itself was alive. And then it emerged. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, half shrouded in shadow. It was impossibly tall, its body a grotesque amalgamation of fur, scales, and jagged bone. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto mine, filled with a malevolence that made my blood run cold. Its mouth split into a snarl, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted through the forest, the creature crashing through the undergrowth behind me. Its growls echoed, reverberating through my chest. I didn't dare look back. My foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling. I scrambled to my feet just as the creature burst into view, its massive claws slicing through the air inches from my face. I grabbed a rock, swinging it wildly. The impact startled it enough for me to run again. I reached the RV, throwing myself inside and slamming the door. The creature roared, its claws raking against the metal, shaking the vehicle violently. My mind raced, searching for an escape. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I stepped outside cautiously. The forest bathed in an eerie, misty light. The claw marks on the RV were deeper now, almost puncturing the metal. I knew I couldn't stay. As I drove down the winding road, the forest seemed to close in, the trees darker, their shadows longer. Just as I thought I was free, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It was humanoid, impossibly tall, its glowing eyes burning into mine. I swerved, the RV skidding off the road and into a ditch. When I looked up, the figure was gone. Trembling, I restarted the engine and drove until I reached the nearest town, my mind racing with what I'd seen. I tried to tell the locals, but their faces grew pale, their gazes shifting nervously. One old man finally spoke. "You saw the guardian. It protects the forest, but it doesn't like intruders." The guardian, a creature bound to the forest, awakened by something, or someone, who had crossed its ancient boundaries. I realized the bone, the symbols, the stone structure. They were connected, and I had disturbed them. Months later, I still dream of the guardian. I see its glowing eyes, feel its claws raking the RV. Sometimes I wake to find symbols scratched into my walls, identical to those in the clearing. I've left Pine Grove, but I know I'll never truly escape. The forest called me once, and I fear it will call me again. Because some places aren't meant to be explored. Some secrets are better left buried, and some guardians never rest.